When my daughter-in-law told me I should pack my bags, I smiled instead of crying. I didn't want to make the moment louder than it already was. Inside, my heart felt heavy, like it had been tied in knots and left out in the rain. For years, I had raised my son, cooked for him, celebrated his birthdays, and quietly wiped away his tears when life got hard. And now, it felt like none of it mattered. I remember standing in the doorway, the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen lingering in the air, and my son just watching. His eyes didn't have the warmth I was used to. I wanted to reach out, to hold on to the boy who had once clung to my apron strings, but I hesitated. He was different now. Married. His life was no longer mine to touch. And yet, part of me couldn't let go. I took a deep breath and said softly, "I'll go when it's right." My voice didn't tremble, but my mind was spinning with memories. I remembered the nights I stayed awake waiting for him to come home safely, the mornings I brewed his favorite tea just the way he liked it, and the countless times I had quietly carried his worries in my own heart. And suddenly, all those small acts of love felt invisible. I realized then that this wasn't just about me leaving the house. It was about my son slowly forgetting who I was. The boy who once called me mom without hesitation, who needed me for comfort and advice, had started to drift away. I could feel the emptiness of it pressing against my chest. It hurt. It was quiet, persistent, like a shadow I couldn't shake. And yet,
I was born in a small warm house filled with laughter and the smell of home-cooked meals.
I knew life had changed.
My own mother had taught me that a family isn't just people living under the same roof. It's love, patience, and understanding.
Doesn't vanish.
I tried to carry that lesson into my own home, especially with my son.
And in that
From the moment he was born,
standing in the
he was
hallway,
curious and full of questions.
Myself I would
I
wait
can still
too.
remember the way he would crawl to me when he was scared of thunderstorms, or the way he'd hide behind my skirts whenever strangers came to the door. I raised him the way my mother raised me, slowly, gently, with kindness and a steady hand. He grew up strong, intelligent, and caring. People often said I had done a good job, but I never thought much about it. I just loved him. That's all. I made his favorite breakfasts on school mornings, sewed his first school uniform, and stayed awake late at night helping him with homework. Every milestone, every scraped knee, every small triumph, I was there. But life doesn't stay small. And neither do children. My son grew older, went to college, and met the woman he would marry. I welcomed her with an open heart at first, genuinely wanting him to be happy. I reminded myself that love multiplies when families grow, that marriage isn't a replacement but an addition. I truly believed that, until slowly, I realized things were changing. Small things at first. Calls I used to get daily became weekly. Visits were shorter, and sometimes, I'd hear rumors from neighbors about how my son and his wife were managing life together. Nothing dramatic, just the quiet feeling that my place in his heart was shrinking. And I told myself not to worry. After all, life changes. Marriage changes people. Love doesn't disappear, it just shifts. But love also waits for recognition. And sometimes, it waits too long. As the years passed, our home became quieter. Not empty, but quieter in the way that subtle changes make a place feel different without you noticing at first. I still cooked his favorite meals when he visited, set the table the same way he liked it, and kept a small basket of snacks near the living room where we used to watch movies together. It was as if the house itself remembered the boy he had been. I remember one evening years ago, before the wedding. He came home late from work, tired but smiling. We sat at the table, and I asked about his day. He told me about his new apartment, about his fiancée's plans for the kitchen, about how excited he was for their wedding. I listened quietly, happy to hear him talk, even if the words sometimes left me feeling a little distant. I could see how his heart was slowly shifting toward his new life. I told myself it was okay. Change is natural. A son doesn't stop loving his mother because he loves someone else. But that evening, I felt the first hint of a distance I couldn't ignore. When I went to hug him goodnight, he smiled politely, patted my shoulder, and left. I noticed the absence of the small warm gesture he had once given every night. It was subtle, but it stung. After the wedding, things became more noticeable. Phone calls became infrequent. When I visited, it was as if I were an observer in my own son's life. I watched him sit with his wife, laughing at stories I couldn't share, and I felt invisible. I wanted to say something, to tell him I missed the small moments we used to have, but the words never came out. Sometimes, I wondered if it was his wife who had changed him, or if life itself had. Perhaps it was both. I didn't blame her, I only missed my son. And perhaps in those quiet moments, I felt a mix of fear and hope. I feared losing him completely, yet I hoped he would remember, somewhere in his heart, the bond we had built over 20 years. I remember one rainy afternoon, sitting by the window with a cup of tea, watching the drops run down the glass. I thought about the times he had clung to me when he was a child, the nights he stayed awake talking about his dreams, the mornings we shared laughter over small breakfasts. I realized then that nothing could replace that bond. It was ours, no matter how far he drifted. The tension started subtly, like a quiet hum in the background that you don't notice until it grows louder. My son's visits became shorter, and when he came, the conversations always seemed rushed. His wife would often speak first, deciding what topics were allowed. I tried to remain polite, to find ways to connect, but every attempt seemed to shrink under the weight of their new life together. One evening, I had prepared his favorite dinner, hoping for a quiet, familiar evening together. I set the table just like old times, with a small candle in the center and his favorite bread on the side. When they arrived, his wife immediately asked him to help with something in the kitchen, and I realized I was left sitting alone. "Mom, could you pass the salad?" My son said quietly, almost hesitantly, as if he wasn't sure whether I belonged there. I smiled, passing it over without a word. Inside, my chest tightened. I wanted to tell him that I missed how things used to be. I wanted to remind him of the years I had given to raise him, of the small love tucked into everyday acts. But I stayed quiet. The words felt too heavy, too fragile to survive the moment. Later, when everyone else had gone to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen, washing the dishes. I could still smell the faint scent of his cologne on the counter, the lingering warmth of the meals we had shared. I thought about the boy who had once run into my arms without hesitation, and I felt the ache of absence. Small disagreements followed. My suggestions were brushed aside, my advice ignored. When I tried to join conversations, I noticed his tone shift, polite but distant. I remember one night in particular, he said, "Mom, it's fine. Don't worry about it." The words were simple, but the warmth I used to hear in them was gone. I realized then that my place in his life had shifted completely. The roles had changed. I was no longer the first person he turned to. I was no longer the center of his world. I was just someone who existed on the edges of it. And yet, even as my heart ached, I refused to leave entirely. I refused to give up hope. I reminded myself that love isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes, it waits quietly, patiently, even when the world seems to have moved on. Tea was a quiet Saturday morning when the tension hit its peak. I had baked his favorite bread, the one he loved, with honey and butter. I set it on the table with tea and waited for him to come down. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could have a simple moment together, like we used to. He came down, but his wife was already there, checking her phone. She didn't look up when we entered. My son smiled, but it was a distant smile, polite and careful. "Morning, Mom," he said softly, almost like he was testing the waters. "Good morning, dear," I replied, forcing a calm into my voice. "I made your favorite bread." "That's nice," he said, taking a seat. But before I could even pour the tea, his wife spoke up. I froze. The words stung, sharper than I expected. I looked at my son, hoping he would say something, defend me, or even meet my eyes. But he just nodded politely. "I'll get ready," he said, and left the kitchen. I stood there, gripping the edge of the counter, the bread untouched. For the first time, I felt invisible. Not ignored, but erased. I had poured my life into raising him, and now it felt like that life didn't. "Don't bother," she said sharply. "We have plans today. Let's not waste time." I froze. The words stung, sharper than I expected. I looked at my son, hoping he would say something, defend me, or even meet my eyes. But he just nodded politely. "I'll get ready," he said, and left the kitchen. I stood there, gripping the edge of the counter, the bread untouched. For the first time, I felt invisible. Not ignored, but erased. I had poured my life into raising him, and now it felt like that life didn't matter anymore. Later that afternoon, I received a short message from him.
"Mom, it's busy today. Maybe another time." Another time.
Words that felt like a closing door. I sat by the window, watching the rain fall, thinking about all the mornings we shared tea, all the nights we stayed up talking about life, all the times he had held my hand when he was scared.
And now, that warmth was gone. The misunderstandings grew. His wife would often question my presence. "Why are you here again?" she asked once. "He has his own life. You need to respect that." I wanted to explain that I wasn't trying to interfere. I only wanted to be part of my son's life. But I stayed silent. I learned that arguing made things worse. I learned that patience was all I had. There were moments when my son seemed conflicted. I could see it in his eyes when he hesitated before speaking, when he would glance at me and then quickly look away. It hurt more than any harsh words.
It was the quiet loss of connection, the knowledge that the person who had once trusted me completely was now unsure of my place in his life.
One evening, I tried to talk to him gently.
"Do you remember when you were little," I said softly, "and you used to wake me up at night because you had a bad dream?"
He nodded. "Of course, Mom. I miss that," I whispered. "I miss us." He looked down, silent. I didn't want to push him. I just wanted him to remember the bond we shared. But that silence was heavier than any argument. Days turned into weeks, and the distance grew. He called less, visited less. And when he did, the warmth was always replaced by politeness and hesitation. I began to feel like a stranger in my own son's life, and it was a quiet, persistent ache that never left. And then came the moment that broke me, subtle, yet undeniable. It was his birthday, a day I had celebrated with him every year since he was born. I had baked his favorite cake, decorated the house, and waited. No call. No message. Not even a text. I sat at the table, staring at the candles I had lit for him. I felt a wave of sadness I couldn't hide. I realized then that I had been holding on to hope while he had slowly drifted away. And it hurt.
But even in that moment, a small voice inside me whispered, "Love waits.
Love endures." I would wait.
I had to wait. Tea happened one quiet evening, the kind of evening that feels ordinary at first, but ends up changing everything. I had received a call from my son's wife, asking if I could come over to drop off some leftover food I had prepared. I agreed, thinking it was a small, simple gesture, an opportunity to be near him, even briefly. When I arrived, I noticed my son sitting on the sofa, scrolling on his phone. His wife didn't even look up. I set the food on the counter, hoping to catch his eye. "Hey Mom," he said quietly. "Hello dear," I replied, smiling softly. But instead of the warmth I expected, I felt a coldness, an invisible barrier between us. His wife spoke up immediately. "Mom, maybe you should leave," she said. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of authority. "We need space to manage things ourselves." I froze. The words hit me like a stone. Space. Manage things ourselves. I realized then that I was no longer welcome in the everyday life I had once shared with him. The son I had raised, nurtured, and celebrated no longer included me in his world. I took a deep breath. "I'm only here for a short visit," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond. He looked down at his hands, silent. I understood then, he wasn't defending me. He was letting it happen. My heart sank, heavier than it had ever been. Later that night, I returned home, sitting alone by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. I thought about the boy who used to cling to me when he was scared, the teenager who confided in me about his dreams and fears, and the young man who had promised he would always remember me. And now, he seemed like a stranger. I couldn't sleep that night. I went through old photographs, pictures of his first steps, his first day at school, birthdays, holidays. I could see the warmth, the love, the bond that had once been unbreakable. And now it felt like a dream that belonged to someone else. The days that followed were the hardest. Visits became rare, calls even rarer. I began to feel the weight of rejection pressing against my chest. Not from him exactly, but from the life that had shifted so suddenly. I remembered advice my mother had given me long ago: love isn't possession. It's patience. And though I tried to hold on to that, it was difficult. One afternoon, I received a message from him.
"Mum,
I'm busse.
Don't come over this week. Simple words, but they cut deeper than anything else. I felt invisible. And yet, something inside me refused to break. I reminded myself, love waits. Even when it's hard. Even when it hurts. The real breaking moment came unexpectedly. It was a weekend, and I had stopped by to drop off some homemade soup. I thought it would be a kind gesture, something to show I cared without intruding. When I arrived, the house was quiet. My son was in the living room, his wife in the kitchen. I greeted him softly. Dea. Hey, he replied, barely looking up. I set the soup on the counter and tried to engage in small talk, but his wife interrupted. Mom, you really should leave now. He has work to do. I paused, the words washing over me. It was the first time I felt truly unwelcome in the house I had once loved so dearly. I tried to smile, but it felt hollow. Of course, I said softly. I'll go. He didn't stop me. He didn't say anything. And that silence, that absence of care, struck me harder than any argument ever could. I realized then that I had been holding on to hope, while he had already stepped away. I left quietly, walking to my car with a lump in my throat. The rain had started again, small drops tapping on the windshield. I wanted to cry, to scream, to make him see me, but I stayed quiet. The quiet was my strength, my armor. At home, I sat at the kitchen table, holding the soup I had brought back, untouched. I thought about all the years of love, care, and small sacrifices that had gone unnoticed. And I cried, not loud, not dramatic, just quietly, letting the sadness wash over me. It was then I realized something crucial. I couldn't force him to remember. I couldn't demand love or acknowledgement. All I could do was wait quietly, patiently, and hope that one day he would see me again, not as an obligation, but as the mother he once knew. Turning point, end, 600 to 700 words. Days passed, and the silence continued. I found myself walking through memories, his first day of school, the time he came home with a scraped knee, the nights he cried after a bad dream. Every moment reminded me of the bond we shared. And though my heart ached, I began to understand that this distance was part of life's natural flow. I didn't blame him. I didn't even blame his wife. I realized that love sometimes shifts. People grow. And sometimes, the ones we love need space to find their own lives. But love doesn't vanish. Not entirely. One rainy afternoon, as I sat by the window, I wrote him a letter. I didn't complain. I didn't demand. I simply wrote about the memories we shared, the small moments that had shaped both our lives, and how much I still loved him. I left the letter at his doorstep, hoping he would read it in his own time. And that, in a quiet, emotional way, became the start of the change. I didn't know when it would happen or how, but I believed that one day he would remember, not because of guilt, but because of love. After leaving the letter at his doorstep, I didn't expect anything to happen immediately. Days went by, and I carried on with my life quietly. I continued my routines, cooking, tending to the house, walking through the little garden he had once loved. I didn't dwell on the absence, but I allowed myself to feel the ache in my chest. It was part of the process, this quiet longing, this hope that never fully went away. One afternoon, I received a call from my son. I didn't recognize the tone at first. It was hesitant, careful, almost uncertain. Mom, I got your letter, he said softly. My heart skipped a beat. I smiled, though my voice remained calm. I'm glad you did. I hope you read it when you had a quiet moment. He paused, and I could sense the emotions he was holding back. I did. And I remembered, a lot. Things I'd forgotten, Mom. Things that matter. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't speak right away. I simply let him talk. He shared memories I thought had been lost, little details from his childhood, nights we had stayed awake talking, mornings when he had clung to me before school. It was as if the distance had melted for a moment, and I could feel the boy I had raised returning, even if just for a short while. I'm sorry, Mom, he finally said. I didn't realize how much I had pulled away, how much I hurt you. I didn't mean to. I smiled gently. I know, dear. Life takes us in different directions. But love doesn't disappear. That's what matters. It wasn't a sudden fix. It wasn't as if everything returned to the way it had been before.
But it was a start, a quiet, heartfelt acknowledgement of what had been lost. And what could be rebuilt. Over the next few weeks, our relationship began to grow slowly. He started visiting more often, not out of obligation, but out of recognition. He would bring small things he knew I liked, a cup of tea from my favorite shop, a flower from his garden, and sit with me for a few minutes, sharing stories from his life. I learned to listen without pressing him, to offer love without expecting anything in return. The days of feeling invisible began to fade. I realized that patience had been my greatest strength, and that forgiveness wasn't just for him, it was for me too. To release the hurt, to make space for love again. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to me and said, "Mom, I don't want to ever take you for granted again. You've always been my heart, even when I forgot." I reached for his hand, feeling the familiar warmth I had missed for so long. "And you've always been my heart too, dear. No matter what changes, that never goes away." It was a quiet moment, simple and unremarkable to anyone else. But for us, it was everything. A bridge had been rebuilt, not with grand gestures, but with honesty, acknowledgement, and the steady flow of love that had never truly left. The small gestures became a part of our life again. Sometimes, it was a shared cup of tea. Sometimes, it was a brief walk together in the garden. Sometimes, it was just sitting quietly, knowing the other was there. The pain of the past didn't vanish, but it softened, replaced by understanding and connection. I also noticed that his wife began to change too. She started inviting me into their lives with gentle respect, recognizing that my love for her husband wasn't a threat, but a bond that had shaped him into the man he was. Small conversations grew into genuine exchanges. The house no longer felt like a place where I was invisible. One rainy afternoon, I watched him helping his young niece, my granddaughter, tie her shoelaces. He looked up, caught my eye, and smiled. And in that smile, I saw the boy I had raised, the man he had become, and the son who had finally remembered the bond that time and distance could not erase. I realized then that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about understanding. It's about letting go of the pain to make space for love again. And in that space, we found each other. Life doesn't always give us perfect moments. But it gives us second chances, small steps, quiet reunions that matter more than words can say. As the days passed, life slowly returned to a quiet rhythm, one filled with small moments that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. I found joy in the simple things again, a shared cup of tea, a smile across the room, a short conversation about his day. The distance that once seemed unbridgeable had softened, replaced by a gentle understanding that love doesn't always follow the paths we expect, but it endures. I learned that relationships, especially those built over decades, are not measured by grand gestures alone. They are measured by patience, by presence, by the willingness to stay when it's hard and to forgive when it hurts. My son and I didn't reclaim every moment we had lost, but we found a new rhythm, a quieter, wiser love that acknowledged mistakes and celebrated reconnection. One evening, as we sat together watching the sun dip behind the trees, he turned to me and said softly, "Mom, I never realized how much I needed you until I almost lost you." I smiled, feeling warmth spread through me. "And I always needed you too, dear. Even when it felt like you were far away, my love for you never faded." We sat in silence, but it was not the kind of silence that separates, it was the kind that connects. It was filled with the understanding that life changes, people grow, and love sometimes requires patience and forgiveness. I also saw changes in his wife. She began to treat me not as a guest in her home, but as part of the family. Small gestures, a shared laugh, a quiet conversation, even letting me help with little tasks, made the house feel warm again. It was a reminder that relationships can evolve, and that understanding can soften hearts even when barriers seem strong. Looking back, I realized that my greatest lessons came from the quiet moments of heartbreak and the waiting that followed. I learned that love doesn't demand. It waits. It forgives. It persists. And most importantly, it finds its way back when the time is right. I think about the boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and the man he has become. I think about the long evenings we spent sharing dreams, the laughter, the tears. And I understand now that even though life takes people on different paths, love remains the steady compass, guiding us back to each other. If there is one thing I hope anyone listening will remember, it is this: patience, understanding, and quiet love can mend even the deepest distance. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the hurt, it's about opening your heart to the possibility of reconnection. And sometimes, that's all it takes to find your way home. I still remember the first time he held my hand again after months of distance. It was gentle, tentative, but full of meaning. In that moment, I felt a peace I hadn't known in a long time. A mother's love is patient, enduring, and always ready to welcome her children back, no matter how far they wander. And so, I learned to wait. And when he came back, even slowly, I was ready to embrace him with all the love I had carried for years. Because that is what love does, it waits, forgives, and heals.